Hello, welcome to Papa Nick's Music. I am, as always, your host, Papa Nick Lewis, and today is not Friday. Some time ago, I lose track of exactly when. That's the way time blindness works. It's a real thing. Look it up. But some time ago, I did a video where I ranked the series of Taskmaster, and in that video, I said that I was going to start doing these little chats about comedy. You know, not just about the good music here at Pop Nick's Music. And that was the last you'd heard of it. That doesn't mean I haven't been thinking about it. I actually have been working on a series of top 10 sitcoms by decade, American sitcoms, limiting myself to American sitcoms here. And I've made some pretty good progress on that, and that will be coming soon to a YouTube screen near you. But it makes sense to me as I'm thinking about getting ready to actually start making those videos. It makes sense to me to try to spend a little bit of time telling y'all what I think funny is. I mean, you already know I think Taskmaster is funny. But what is the yardstick? How do you judge what I think is funny? Because we all think different things are funny. And so I thought I would do for today's occasional Wednesday comedy topic my top 10 comedy movies. Now, this is not a true top 10. I'm not actually I'm not saying that these are the best comedy movies. My top 5 are pretty closely aligned with what I think of as my favorite comedies. But that's not the purpose of this list. The purpose of this list is to give you, the viewer, a sense of what my taste in comedy is like. And so I'm going out of my way to put a little bit of variety into this. I can give you a very quick example. If I'm making a list of the top 10 best comedies ever made, there's going to be probably 2 or 3 Monty Python movies in that list. I've only got one on on my list today, right? I'm trying to give you as broad a perspective of my sense of funny as I can. So while these are 10 movies that I really do like, they are 10 movies that I think are fantastic, they are not necessarily the 10 best comedies ever made. Cool? Cool. Before we get into this, very quickly, let's do the subjectivity notice, because we have to do the subjectivity notice. Artistic appreciation, what we find funny in this context, is an innately subjective, inherently subjective thing. There is no such thing as objectively good or objectively bad art. There is only art that I like and art that I do not. And as long as we keep that in mind, this is a conversation that is instructive and entertaining, and everything that is light and positive and happy. As soon as somebody in the conversation starts thinking in terms of being objectively right and wrong, that's when everything goes off the rails. We're calling each other dicks and all that sort of stuff. So as long as we don't go down the path of thinking that what I subjectively think, what I intuitively think is somehow objectively true, we're all good. Now, with that out of the way, let's get into the top 10. Now, before we get into the top 10, I do have 3 honorable mentions. When I first started doing this, when I first started brainstorming this list, I thought, okay, I'm going to do my, what I think are the 10 funniest movies. I was going to do a straight up top 10. And I just sat down and started dashing off movies that I thought would be reliable contenders for a spot on the top 10 funniest movies ever made. And I quit when I got to about 35, 40 movies, because it's like, okay, if I've got that many movies that I think are funny, it's going to be really hard for me to crank that down to a best 10 list. That, by the way, is when I started thinking in terms of trying to give you a sense of variety rather than a ranked list. But even then, if I'm thinking of giving you a sense of variety, there were still more. I was trying to shoehorn more movies into that top 10 than I could. So I'm giving you 3 honorable mentions. If this were a true top 10 ranking, I would not give myself this out. I don't think I would. I might. Yeah, I can be hypocritical. My first honorable mention is 1987's The Princess Bride. I really like this movie. I think a lot of people really like this movie. I would be surprised if I met somebody and found out that they just despised this movie. It doesn't seem to me to be the kind of movie that you can work up hatred for, because it is so sweet and so gentle and so charming. Sweet, right? It's just a good, sweet movie. I really like The Princess Bride. The humor is soft, muted edges. There are some nice bits of social satire in there, but for the most part, it's just a good, pleasant movie. I would say that this compare in terms of other movies that I could put in here if I wanted to. This compares to movies like Local Hero and Breaking Away, movies that I really, really love, but I'm never going to actually burst out into laughter while I'm watching them. I think they're wonderful movies. I think they're funny movies. They're just not going to make me laugh out loud. That's not the kind of humor that we've got. So, honorable mention number 3, The Princess Bride. My honorable mention number 2, I'm counting these down in case you can't tell. Honorable mention number 2 is 1938's Bringing Up Baby. Oh, I love me some good screwball comedy. And Bringing Up Baby is my favorite of the screwball comedies. I considered His Girl Friday and The Philadelphia Story, but I eventually picked Bringing Up Baby to be my example. I think the writing in this movie is very good. The characterizations are very good. It's a wonderful farce. All of the pieces fit together nicely. It's seamless as you go through it, and it's just everything you want in a screwball comedy. The reason why I think of Bringing Up Baby a little bit more fondly than the rest of them is that first we've got Cary Grant and Katharine Hepburn, who are two wonderful actors, but we also have Cary Grant and Hepburn both playing against type. Now, granted, this was when they were still young enough in their careers that they hadn't necessarily established their types. But you think of Cary Grant, you think of suave, debonair, ladies' man. You don't think of bookish nerd, which is what he's playing in Bringing Up Baby. You think of Katharine Hepburn. You think of strong, intelligent, fiercely intelligent. You don't think social ditz, which is what she's playing here in Bringing Up Baby. It's just a wonderful, wonderful movie. I gotta love Bringing Up Baby. And then my top-ranking honorable mention movie. This movie is not even technically a comedy, but it still makes my list of honorable mentions. It's an action-adventure movie, but the comedy in it is integral to the plot and is, for me, the reason why I keep coming back and watching the movie. Most action movies, at least modern action movies, have an element of humor to them as a way of softening the suspense, softening the violence in some cases. And so it's not unusual to find an action movie that has humor in it. It is unusual to find an action movie that has such successful comedy, to where I think it does stand alone as a comedy movie. And that is 1999's The Mummy. I talked a lot about The Mummy in my Halloween movie video. I love The Mummy. I love this version of the Mummy. I like the original Mummy. I like the Boris Karloff Universal Mummy. But I love the Brendan Fraser remake. Brendan Fraser's got fantastic comic timing. Rachel Weisz, fantastic comic timing. Weisz or Weisz? I like saying Weisz. I don't know which it is. John Hannah is just brilliant in this movie. The Mummy has just beautiful comedy. Love The Mummy. And I love the fact that the comedy arises naturally from the characters. It's not an artificial thing that's put in where people are laughing because they're tense. In the Terminator 2, when the Terminator says to the police officer at the window, "I'll be back," everybody in the audience cracked up at that. But I don't think they were laughing because it was a funny line. It was a funny line, but the laugh it got was not due to the funniness of the line. The laugh it got was due to the break in the tension that the line represented. The humor in The Mummy is a natural byproduct of the characterization. So I think it works better as a comedy. Okay, so enough of the honorable mentions. Let's get to the top 10. And for the first entry in my top 10 list, one of the things I noticed when I was making that brainstorming list I was talking about earlier, I looked back over that list and I realized I didn't have any movies from the 21st century. on this list. The most recent movies I had were movies like The Mummy from 1999. And it's like, okay, there have to be some there have to be some good comedies that were made in the last 20 years. And there are some good comedies that were made in the last 20 years. They're just not ones that spring to mind when I'm thinking about what are the best comedies, what are the funniest comedies. So I don't know that it would make an actual top 10 because it didn't even make my top 35 to 40 when I was generating my brainstorming list. But coming in at number 10 on this list is my token 21st century comedy, and that is 2007's Hot Fuzz. When I was thinking about, okay, what are the movies of the last 20 years that I want to include, the two finalists were Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz, both Simon Pegg, Nick Frost movies. I love these movies. I think Hot Fuzz is the funnier of the two, so that's why it's on the list here. I think it's got some very good satire in it. Spot on, good movie. If I'm looking for other movies of the 20th century to at least think about including in a list like this, they would be Step Brothers, because I'm a huge fan of Will Ferrell. Man will do anything for a laugh, which I admire the hell out of. And Bridesmaids, also a funny movie. For the most part, though, I don't think there's been a whole lot of super quality comedy done over the last 20 years. Leave a comment below. Tell me the super brilliant comedy of the last 20 years, and remind me that it's there, because chances are good I'll agree with you. But my number 10, Hot Fuzz. My number 9 movie. If I'm going to make a list of movies that I think are funny, movies that actually make me laugh, that list has to include something by Peter Sellers, because Peter Sellers is one of the most brilliant comic actors, and he can do everything. He can do character comedy, he can do wordplay, he can do slapstick, he can do everything. And he largely does everything in the Pink Panther movies. So my token Pink Panther movie is 1976's The Pink Panther Strikes Again. For me, if I'm going to include a Pink Panther movie, it's either going to be Pink Panther Strikes Again or the movie immediately preceding it, Return of the Pink Panther, that are, I think, the two funniest Pink Panther movies of the ones that Peter Sellers filmed while he was still alive. We're not counting anything that was assembled or filmed after his death. But of those that were made when he was alive, those are the two biggies. And for my money, Pink Panther Strikes Again gets the nod because Does Your Dog Bat, I think, is a funnier scene than Yes, Chimpanzee Minky. But those are going to be the two reasons why. The two things that I'm looking at is the decision maker here for Pink Panther. But 1976's Pink Panther Strikes Again, number 9. Coming in at number 8. The Coen brothers have made a lot of really good, really funny movies. And ones that I considered putting on this list were Fargo, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, Intolerable Cruelty, believe it or not, Lady Killers, even more, believe it or not. But the one I'm going with, the one that I think is the funniest movie that they've done, by a hair, just a little bit funnier than Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, is 1987's Raising Arizona. It was the first Coen Brothers movie I saw, and it still, to my mind, is the funniest one they've done. Don't get me wrong, all you Big Lebowski fans. I like The Big Lebowski. I think it's a good movie. I think it's a funny movie. I just don't think it's on the same level as even, yes, Intolerable Cruelty. I think Intolerable Cruelty is a funnier movie than The Big Lebowski. So sue me. But I do like Raising Arizona an awful lot. It is a wonderfully quotable movie, and I like that. Number 8, Raising Arizona. Okay, number 7. We cannot have a top 10 funniest movies of all time kind of list, a top 10 my favorite funny movies, without having at least something by the Marx Brothers. I'm a huge fan of the Marx Brothers. And, there are any number of movies that deserve to be here in this list. Duck Soup, I think, is the one that most people would pick. Animal Crackers is also hilarious. Horse Feathers, I always like. I mean, it's set in a college, which means it's speaking to me in a language that I understand. And it's one of the few Marx Brothers movies where Groucho plays his guitar. Most people know, everybody knows that Harpo played the harp. Most people know that Chico, and it is Chico, not Chico. Most people know that Chico played the piano. Not very many people know that Groucho was a guitarist. He was actually a decent guitar player. And he played his guitar in Horse Feathers. He also played it, I think, in Go West. Don't quote me on that. But the one I'm going to include here, because when I think of the Marx Brothers, I think of Groucho. He's my favorite of the bunch. I love Chico's malaprop wordplay. I think that's very funny. I think most of Harpo's physical comedy is brilliant. His tendency to chase women has not aged well, but when I think of the Marx Brothers, I think of the wordplay more than the physical comedy, and Groucho is the king of wordplay. So I think Groucho, and the thing that Groucho did in any of the movies that made me laugh the hardest was a scene from 1935's Night at the Opera. It's in the climactic scene when the authorities are chasing the Marx Brothers through the opera house while the opera is being performed. And at one point, a character in the opera, this haggard witch-like woman, is singing mournfully into the camera, and then the camera cuts to one of the theatrical boxes. You got people who are, enwrapped as they are watching the opera, and Groucho leans over and goes, "Booga, booga, booga." And every time I see that, I just die. Oh. Night at the Opera comes in at number 7. At number 6, okay, here in a little bit, we're eventually going to get to number 1, and my number 1 movie is the hardest I've laughed out loud in a public theater while I was watching the movie. Coming in at number 6 is the hardest I've laughed while sitting alone watching a movie on TV. And that is 1981's S.O.B. S.O.B. was written and directed by Blake Edwards, who did the Pink Panther movies, so I very briefly considered not including Pink Panther, because if I've got to include either a Pink Panther movie or S.O.B., I'm including S.O.B. I think it's a much better movie. But I really wanted to include the Pink Panther, and I wanted to include the Pink Panther because it was an example of Peter Sellers' comic abilities, not because it was Blake Edwards. Here, this is Blake Edwards. The script at times is a little ham-handed, but it is a brilliantly written satire. And the performers are fantastic. This has Richard Mulligan. Oh my God, Richard Mulligan is good in this. William Holden is good in this. Robert Webber is delightful. And Robert Preston just knocks it out of the park. I mean, we've got a very good cast in this movie, and it's a very strong script. And it's got Julie Andrews, hey, so Julie Andrews showing her boobs. I mean, how can you not like that? I love S.O.B. The scene toward the end when Richard Mulligan is riding in the car wearing the Viking horns. I thought I was going to piss my pants. I laughed so hard at that. Oh, my gosh. Other movies that I considered here, or the other movie that I considered adding in here because I do think so fondly of Blake Edwards, was Victor Victoria. Also, I very strongly recommend Victor Victoria. Okay. Now, my top 5 are actually, if you ask me what are my favorite comedy movies, this is probably going to be these top 5. So I think from here on out, I have an actual ranking. At number 5, I have 1980's Airplane, which, I mean, let's face it, if you tell 7,000 jokes in the course of a movie, you're going to have a higher number of laughs than virtually any other comedy movie, simply because of the shotgun effect of the jokes. I mean, you can't have in any of these Zucker Brothers and Jim Abrahams movies, you can't have more than 2 seconds go by without there being some sort of gag, some sort of joke, some sort of sight gag in the background. There's got to be something. There is, I mean, it's a constant barrage. And in that constant barrage, a lot of it was just, I mean, lowest common denominator crap humor, but a lot of it was also wonderfully inspired. And the reason why I would pick Airplane, I mean, we could say the same thing about Naked Gun or any of the sequels about Top Secret, or, you know, there's a bunch of these movies that all came out, but they all came out after Airplane, and Airplane set the standard. And the thing about Airplane that made it the most successful, we've from a modern perspective, we lose sight of this. But if you saw Airplane when it was first released, you knew who Leslie Nielsen was, and he was not a comic actor. You knew who Lloyd Bridges was, and Lloyd Bridges was not a comic actor. You knew who Peter Graves was not a comic actor. These were actors who had established their careers playing supporting roles in the kinds of movies that this movie was satirizing. It was brilliant. It was brilliant. Oh, love Airplane. And then the leads were people that you didn't know anything about. So you came in, because nobody knew who Julie Haggerty or Robert Hayes was before Airplane, right? You came into this movie with absolutely no expectations. You knew it was a comedy, but you didn't know much more than that. And there was no way you could have imagined that this would be the movie that you would see. It was brilliant. Brilliant movie. Coming in at number 4. One of my favorite movies of all time. It's in here at number 4 because it's one of my favorite movies of all time, and I think it's a very good comedy. But it's also a representative of the kind of movie that you watch, that you like, that you know a lot of people may not be familiar with. Or if they are passingly familiar. They're not necessarily as enthusiastic about that particular work as you are. So that when you find somebody who does like it the same way you do, this is now an instant bonding thing, right? It's not really a niche market comedy, but that's kind of what I'm thinking of. They're comedies that people have heard of, but not everybody just is falling over themselves in their adoration of that particular comedy, but you think it's fantastic. And my example of this is 1996's That Thing You Do. Oh my God, do I love this movie. I mean, I like Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks can do no wrong as far as I'm concerned. But I love this movie. I think it is. If I'm praising Tom Hanks here, I'm praising Tom Hanks as writer and director, not as the actor, because this script is wonderful. These characters are wonderful. It's an engaging story. It is lovingly told, and I just love watching this movie. I can't tell you how many times I've seen it. I can quote large chunks of it, and every once in a while I meet somebody who also likes it. One of the guys, one of my old bandmates, was a big That Thing You Do fan. And man, we could swap those lines backwards and forwards, and you find somebody who is a fan of That Thing You Do, you've got an instant bond there. Other movies that I would put that have the same kind of effect that I almost had crack in my top 10 here are the Mike Judge movies, Office Space and Idiocracy. I think most people have heard of Office Space, but not everybody is a rabid fan. Most people have heard of Idiocracy, but not everybody is a rabid fan. The people who are rabid fans, once they find other rabid fans, okay, we've got something in common here. Yeah, That Thing You Do, number 4. I would also, by the way, put in this category an actual movie that nobody has ever heard of. Over my shoulder back here, you can see I've got a drawing of the Maltese Falcon hanging on my wall back there. My sister, there it is. My sister drew this for me, gave it to me as a present several years ago. Thank you very much, Kelly. I appreciate it. And this is a reference to a movie that we both have seen, that we both love. It's not the Maltese Falcon, though. The movie that is in reference to is a movie from 1975, I think, called The Black Bird. It was a very... It was a combination sequel to and spoof of The Maltese Falcon. It stars George Segal as Sam Spade Jr., who has inherited his father's detective agency as well as his father's debts. And so he's working as a detective to pay off his father's debts, even though he doesn't want to be a detective. He's never wanted to be a detective. And he's thrown back into the mystery surrounding the Maltese Falcon. And there are elements of this movie that did not age well. Racial humor dealing with the detective's name, for example. But for the most part, it is just a hilarious movie. It's got some very clever dialogue in it. Lionel Stander is just brilliant as the criminal tough guy in this movie. It is a hilarious movie. And in all of my life, all of the people I have talked to outside of my immediate family, I've only met one other person who has ever seen this movie. Nobody has ever seen this movie. And the people who have seen it, probably hate it. It was panned when it was first released. I have yet to see a positive critical review of it anywhere. And it was a huge bomb. It made absolutely no money. But hey, if we're talking, I find out that you like The Blackbird. Oh man, we're good. We're set. Number 4, That Thing You Do. Number 3 on my list is, again, one of my favorite movies. I love this movie. It's from 1967, and it is Bedazzled, the retelling of the Faust legend, written by Peter Cook and Dudley Moore. I love Peter Cook and Dudley Moore as a comedy team. They're both very, very funny. We could include a bunch of Dudley Moore movies in here because Dudley Moore is always funny, even with the stuff that doesn't age that well. Arthur, for example, has not aged that well. It's still a very funny movie when you watch it. His supporting role in Foul Play. I mean, Foul Play, that's supposed to be Chevy Chase and Goldie Hawn, but Dudley Moore ends up stealing that thing. Wonderful actors, wonderful comedians. But Bedazzled is like 5 notches above everything else that they did. It's a brilliant, brilliant comedy. If you have never seen Bedazzled, the original Peter Cook, Dudley Moore version, you need to track this movie down and watch it. It's got some of my favorite dialogue that I've ever heard in a comedy movie. I'm not casting aspersions at the Brendan Fraser remake that Harold Ramis did. It's just, no, we're not going to do this. No. I love Brendan Fraser. I love Harold Ramis. But no. If we're talking Bedazzled, we're talking 1967 with Pete and Dud. So, number 3, 1967's Bedazzled. Okay, got to have a Monty Python movie in here. So, number 2 is going to be our token Monty Python movie. And frankly, we could pick any of them and slot them in here. I think the best arguments we've got are for either Holy Grail or Life of Brian. And I would go with Life of Brian of the two. So number 2, I've got 1979's Monty Python's Life of Brian. I think overall Life of Brian is a bit funnier than Monty Python and the Holy Grail. It's got a little bit more consistency to the story arc. The thing about Holy Grail that always frustrated me was toward the end, the movie just kind of falls apart. And they know it's falling apart, and so they make that falling apart part of the movie. But Life of Brian doesn't have that problem. So I think it's a better movie. I think it's better written. It holds together better. I also think that it is a wonderful example of how you can spend all of your time making fun of religion, and the people who are religious will not care for the most part. But if you make fun of religious people, they get their dander up. Life of Brian came out in 1979, and it was widely protested in the United States because it was blasphemous. It wasn't blasphemous. There's nothing blasphemous in there. There's no mockery of Christ or of Christ's life or the events of his life. The Christ story is not the thing that's being lampooned here. What's being lampooned in this movie is the fervor of the people who are following Christ. In 1980, the movie Holy Moses was released. Dudley Moore. And that movie was directly lampooning biblical events. Nobody cared. And I think nobody cared for two reasons. Number one, it was talking about the Old Testament rather than the New Testament, and it's an amazing how much you can irritate a certain segment of the population by mocking Christianity. They don't necessarily get their dander up if you're mocking Judaism. But then the second reason is that Holy Moses was, for the most part, mocking the events of the Bible. It wasn't mocking the people who believe the events of the Bible the way Life of Brian did. I just think it's interesting. But number two, 1979's Life of Brian. Hey, if only because we get to see Graham Chapman's penis, you know? You got to take the joys in life as they come. For number one, my favorite comedy movie. This one actually is my favorite comedy movie. This is the hardest I've ever laughed in public. I laughed so hard at this movie that I seriously thought I was going to piss my pants. I was having trouble breathing. I was seeing spots. My ribs hurt the next day. I was laughing so hard at this movie. My number one comedy movie is 1974's Young Frankenstein. Now, we got to have Mel Brooks on this list somewhere. And you know we got to have Mel Brooks on this list somewhere. And if I'm making an actual top 10 of the funniest movies ever made, then yeah, we're going to have Young Frankenstein on this list. We're going to have Blazing Saddles on this list. We're probably going to have History of the World Part 1 on this list. We're probably going to have High Anxiety on the list. We're probably going to have The Producers on the list, right? I mean, I could do a top, at least a top 5 with Mel Brooks. Probably get close to a top 10 with Mel Brooks before you get into, some of the lesser crap. Mel Brooks is just a brilliant technician. I mean, the man knows comedy. He knows how to make it work. He knows how to film it. Hardest I've ever laughed in a movie theater in public. Well, no, the hardest I've ever laughed in public was when I saw George Carlin live. When he was doing his expanded list of words you can't say on television. I was almost literally on the floor of the arena laughing. But the hardest I've ever laughed at a movie was the first time I saw Peter Boyle's Frankenstein's Monster singing Puttin' on the Ritz. Oh my God. I mean, seriously, I thought I was going to piss my pants. And my ribs hurt the next day. I laughed that hard at it. Young Frankenstein is brilliant movie. Everything about it is brilliant. It is a perfect movie. If I use my standards of what makes a perfect album, if I adapt those to movies, Young Frankenstein is a perfect movie. Oh, love that movie. So those are my top 10 comedies. My top 10 if I'm trying to give you a sense of what my taste in comedy is like. There would be other movies I'm sure that you would rather see on there that compare to these. Drop the note down below. Let me know what you think I've forgotten, because there's a good chance I have just overlooked it. There's also a good chance that it's something like Big Lebowski that you think is hilarious, that I think is good, but not like top 10 worthy good. But anyway, either way, leave a comment below. Let me know. I always love talking about this stuff. And as always, I would appreciate it if you would consider clicking that like button. And while you're clicking the like button, go ahead and click that subscribe button. And while you're clicking the subscribe button, go ahead and click that notification button. Just click all the clickable things. It'll be fun. It'll be wonderful. And I would be very grateful if you did that. Thank you very much for sticking it out this far. And I hope that the rest of your day is invigorating. See you soon.